What is evolution and what is the naturalism model?
Well, let's start with the naturalism model first, since evolution really is a kind of a sub point of the naturalism model. The naturalism model basically is just kind of the scientific model that most scientists operate under today, which is that only nature, only the material things of nature can provide any explanation. They're the only things basically that matter in science. So obviously that excludes God, any activity of God in creation, and states that everything that we see is a result of naturalistic mechanisms. So the result of physical interactions between matter, the result of random, purposeless forces. So within that, then we look at within the naturalism model. For example, the Big Bang is one example, or one kind of subpoint of the naturalism model for where all the matter and energy in the universe came from was from the Big Bang. Then when we talk about evolution, evolution is really the way to explain the diversity of the biological organisms that we see on Earth. And a lot of people, it's not necessarily inherent in the evolution model that the kind of this idea of chemical evolution of where everything originally came from several billion years ago. But once life started really is when the evolution model takes off. And the idea there is that, and this is important really to think about, because the evolution model today is terribly misguided. It's taught very poorly. The evolution is not change. The idea in the evolution model right now is that it's change. That when you see when there's any observable change in any type of organism, that's evolution, and that's absolutely false. That is not what evolution is. Evolution is very specifically the explanation for how we got all of the biological diversity that we see on Earth today, how that arose from a single-cell organism that developed somehow billions of years ago. So the idea is that evolution explains it's the transformation of organisms over time, and from one organism that had previously never existed to another organism that had previously never existed, developing new traits that had never previously existed. And so the idea is that you have a prokaryotic organism that has prokaryotic cell structure, so that's a bacteria, that somehow that acquired new genetic information that would transform it from a prokaryote into a eukaryote, into a single-cell eukaryotic organism. All of the differences between that cell, where you have the mitochondria, where you have the Golgi apparatus, you have endoplasmic reticulum, et cetera. All of these things that you don't see in a prokaryotic cell that are now in a eukaryotic cell, all of that genetic information had to come from somewhere to make those things so that they could transform. And there's this theory, again, completely unproven, unsubstantiated theory that, say, a mitochondria came from, were an incorporated bacteria, that there's no evidence that a eukaryotic cell can exist without a mitochondria, so the eukaryotic cell had to already exist in that model to incorporate the bacteria into it. But again, the eukaryotic cell already had to exist, and how could it exist if it didn't have mitochondria? I mean, there are so many problems with the evolution model when you think about it like that, but that is the model. And then that single cell eukaryotic organism had to have some mechanism to acquire new DNA that would give it the blueprints to build itself into a multicellular eukaryotic organism. Eventually, you got to a fish. And so a fish arose from all of the living things prior to that. And then over time, that fish, again, that ancestor fish species that was going to eventually evolve into an amphibian, was acquiring new characteristics, new traits through the acquisition of new meaningful genetic information that arose, again, theoretically through mutation, which has never been shown to ever do anything other than harm the system or at least be neutral to the system. So all of this genetic information was being acquired in some way in that ancestor fish organism that was going to eventually transform into an amphibian. So the fish that has a two-chamber heart and a one-way circulatory system and gills and no appendages, all of that genetic information had to come from somewhere for it to develop a three-chamber heart, a two-way circulatory system, lungs, different kinds of skin, arms, forelegs, etc. That all of that information had to come from somewhere, so that fish ancestor organisms could then transform into an amphibian, which had never obviously before existed. This is what evolution is. It's the transformation of one type of organism that had previously never existed into a new type of organism that never existed through the acquisition somehow of genetic information that would code for the building of all of the new traits that ancestor organism needed to transform into the one that it's transforming into. And that is what evolution is, the previous life giving rise to all of the diverse life that we see today.
What is the significance of evolution within the scientific community?
I think that is highly variable. It really depends on the position that a given scientist has. We have scientists that are out in out in the kind of the private institutions, out practicing their science out there, and we have scientists that are in the public institutions that receive their funding and through the government and through the approval of their other academic friends and neighbors. So the way that you pursue science mostly is completely ambivalent toward evolution, because the science is what the science is, irrespective of how you got there. So it's irrespective of creation as well. So when you're trying to look at the physiological processes of a bacteria or the behavior of an organism or something, you're doing studies based on the here and now and how did it get here, trying to understand it. So in many ways, it's really ambivalent to it, but it does have these underpinnings that kind of automatically make you discount certain things that maybe you shouldn't. For example, when you believe that dinosaurs died out over 65 million years ago, that would lead you to believe certain things about the fossils that you're finding, such as the fact that there shouldn't be any soft tissues in these fossils. And things like cartilage and even organ tissue, bone marrow, stuff like that. So if you believe that it's that old, you are already programmed to not look for it. And if you don't look for it, obviously you're not going to find it. And then when you do decide you're going to look for it, for some soft tissue, like Mary Schweitzer did several years ago in a Tyrannosaurus Rex femur that she had, your colleagues think that you're crazy. Why would you actually look for soft tissue? Well, it turns out that soft tissue is there. And not only was it just in that one fossil, it's in lots and lots and lots of fossils. And that's a problem. So you have been blinded by your ideology of the Earth being billions of years old and these organisms that you're digging up being millions of years old. You're blinded to the ability to find really, really cool scientific discovery that took way longer than it should have to find, because you just assumed it wasn't there. And, there's no rational explanation for why fossils contain soft tissues. It should be gone. All of Mary Schweitzer's colleagues thought that she was crazy when she said she was going to look for soft tissues in her T-Rex fossil, but it was there. And that's a problem for scientists to come at something where they're already pre-programmed to miss real scientific discovery. And so that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is these dirty little secrets that have been lost over time, but that are absolutely fundamentally based on evolution. Things like why does Marxism and communism result in killing millions of people? It's an evolutionary based paradigm of approaching economy and approaching your societal organization that is based on evolution, that has the very predictable outcome of many, hundreds of millions of people dying. That's an evolutionary-based thing. Why did the Nazis kill millions of Jews and people from Poland and other places? Because that was an evolutionary belief system that was developed by the scientists in Germany, that the Jews and other people were an inferior race, evolutionarily speaking, and so let's speed up evolution and get rid of it. That is again, these are very just conveniently forgotten reasonable outcomes of evolutionary thought. I'm not saying that was a reasonable thing to try to kill Jews like the Nazis did. No, I'm just saying that's a very rational outcome if you believe in evolution, that we are constantly evolving to getting better and better, which again, in and of itself makes absolutely no sense that random processes are going to result in a species getting better. Random processes are only they only degrade things. They don't build, they only break down. So, but that is a very rational outcome of, okay, here's evolution. We believe that we are constantly progressing forward, and we see all of these different races, so-called races around us. By the way, there's no racism in creation, by the way, because we're all from the same, we all come from the same people. But in evolution, there's all of these races that exist. And so it's a natural outcome that one is going to be more superior than the other. That is just a fundamental belief system in evolution. Like I said, it's a very conveniently, it's an inconvenient truth, but that was an outcome of that. People now deify Planned Parenthood. But Planned Parenthood was developed by a lady who was a racist and a eugenicist and was trying to get rid of all of the African Americans in America because she believed in this evolutionary system that white people were superior, and so let's speed up evolution to get rid of them. That's why we have Planned Parenthood. That's why all of the Planned Parenthood clinics are heavily populated in African American neighborhoods. Now we're gonna deify her, but the whole premise behind it was an evolutionary belief that there are inferior peoples in the world, and so let's get rid of them. Let's speed them up. I mean, it's very I mean, unsavory to be is a soft word for it, but that's why we have, that's why we've killed millions and millions and millions of our babies, not only in America but around the world. Was developed from this idea that there are people that are inferior and don't deserve to live, and that's just so despicable. But that is a rational thought process. That's a rational endpoint that you get to when you believe in evolution. And like I said, it's an inconvenient truth. But all of these things I'm talking about, these are not things that are confusing. Karl Marx, or even questionable. Karl Marx and Charles Darwin were great pen pals back in the day, and the Nazi scientists were wholly committed evolutionists and believed what they were doing was based on just good science at the time. The eugenicists, again, heavily based in evolution, and thought that they were doing good science. We know that that's not true, but that is that's the ultimate point that you lead to when you remove God from your belief system, when you remove God from society, when you remove God from science, and all you're left with is naturalism and the evolutionary foundation of that. That's the natural conclusion that you get to. Very wrong natural conclusion, but it is a natural conclusion that you get to.
We hear natural selection and evolution used together all the time. Is there a difference between the two, and can you explain natural selection?
There's a big difference between the two, yes, because natural selection is actually scientific observation, and evolution is not. It is a kind of pretend explanation for how we got biological diversity on Earth. So natural selection is the observation that there are, within populations of organisms, there are organisms within those populations that are more fit to survive, the more fit organisms live longer. They live longer to reproduce and pass their fit genes on to their offspring, while the organisms that are less fit in general don't live as long. They don't live long enough often to pass their unfit genes on to their offspring. And so over time, as you get within a population, as you get the fit organisms reproducing with other fit organisms and unfit organisms not able to reproduce as often, the genes, the gene pool, the makeup of within the genome that makes the fit organisms more fit for their environment, those genes naturally get passed on over time and become more prominent in the population, where the less fit genes don't get passed on. And so the characteristics that make an organism less fit don't get passed on either. So over time, you get a population that has adapted to its environment better because of this idea of natural selection. Just naturally, you have these organisms that are able to reproduce, pass their genes on, their more fit genes on for their environment, more fit, get passed on over time, while the less fit organisms don't do that, and you get that change over time. And that can cause very observable change. That is that you can see even over the lifetime of again, much against this deep time model that we need that is needed in evolution. Deep time is a magic elixir supposedly in naturalism, but it still doesn't work no matter how much time you have. But even within the lifetime of individuals doing real scientific observation, observing the effects of natural selection and driving adaptation within environments, very real things. Peter and Mary Grant in the Galapagos Islands, looking at the finches, they observed the effects of natural selection and how it can drive changes within populations very quickly. Not slow, very quickly, but still, that doesn't. The difference is that change, what can occur there through natural selection, is within limits. What they observed, did the Grants observe the finch population transforming into a type of organism that never before existed? No. Because that's what evolution would be. What they observed was the characteristics of some of the finch populations during drought conditions changed a little bit. Their beaks got a little bit bigger, their bodies got a little bit bigger, et cetera. And then when the drought went away, within the individual finch populations, a ground finch, for example, they got a little bit bigger beaks, a little bit bigger bodies. And then when the drought went away, they rapidly changed back to where they were prior to the drought. Their bodies got a little bit smaller, their beaks got a little bit smaller. Simply the observable effects of adaptation, which is what natural selection is, versus evolution, which again, as we talked about earlier, is the development of characteristics that never before existed. In the natural selection observation studies, organisms, their beaks, which already existed, got a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit smaller, whatever, but nothing new changed, nothing new was created, nothing new was generated. What already existed, the already existing traits, simply changed in response to these changes in their environments. And like I said, it changed very quickly over a matter of generations. It did not require thousands of years. Sorry, it did not require millions of years to do that. Whereas evolution, which supposedly is fueled by natural selection, evolution is the change, the development of traits that never before existed, characteristics that never before existed, to cause one type of organism to transform into an organism, a type of organism that never before existed, a fish to transform into an amphibian. Again, the problem is natural selection is not observed to cause those kind of changes. It only causes changes within existing characteristics. It doesn't cause brand new characteristics that never before existed to arise in a population. So they're very different things, and the evolution model has mixed them together and made things very, very confusing, to the point where the people that believe in the evolution model don't really even understand the difference between natural selection and evolution, and what natural selection is capable of doing, causing adaptation. Adaptation is not evolution. Natural selection is not evolution. They are genetically very different things, and genetically, natural selection does not do what evolution needs it to do to occur.